Well,
Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We'll get started very shortly.
everybody.
And feel free to, if you want to turn on your video, but no obligation to do so today.
Just out of curiosity, how early is it right now?
It's 11 a.m., so not that early.
Not too bad.
Though I'm aware it's quite late for those of you right
Everyone's had their coffee.
the
They
US.
should be in good shape. Yeah.
They should be okay. Yeah. Can everyone see my screen?
Looks great.
Yep.
I
Cool.
like the color.
All right. I'm aware we have a lot we want to cover today, so we'll just get started. The session is going to be recorded for those who's interested to look at it afterwards. And please feel free to post your chat questions or comments in the chat. Today we're excited to run this seminar on building high-quality digital health apps, essentially with colleagues from, I would say, the SPESI team at Stanford. And before we start, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Bidjigal, Gadigal, Ngunnawal, and Ngambri Nation, to which the UNSW campuses sits, and pay my respects to any elders past and emerging, and any Torres Strait Islander as well, who join us today and views the recording in future. These are a group of presenters speaking today, wide variety of those from clinical, I would say, as well as engineering and other backgrounds. So I believe it'll be an exciting one for everyone. I'll briefly just talk about why we have this session today and the importance of it, and then hand over to the colleagues from Stanford. Everyone might not realize, but 1/4 of people today around the world own a mobile phone. And this is quite important because it means that for many, it can be the gateway to accessing healthcare. And 68% of it use it with the internet. As a result, there's been a boom in mobile apps, over 350,000 of them, according to some sources. And often the case, it's more of app stores being gatekeepers to these apps. And the bottom, you'll see that in 2024, there's over 3.5 billion app downloads from the app stores alone. There's certainly regulation on the right, some examples of FDA-approved softwares, if you see. But again, they're a very small cross-section of the many that's out there and are being used by people. But what's the quality of them is the question. And I often get asked, including by students, how do we assess the many different options? There's tools and frameworks. The HON code is one. There's mobile app rating scales. But beyond these measures of face validity, we need more quality trials, real-world studies, but also platforms such as SPESI that will be discussed today, which has many of these features built in. And this comes back a bit as well to some prior research that I've published before, where we've looked at apps for breathlessness. We did systematic reviews, but also an analysis of publicly available ones. And we see poor quality. Really, no apps were fully compliant with those HON code principles of authority, confidentiality, having interoperability and others, as well as if you see on the right, we were only able to find really very few studies that we can pull and use standardized outcomes for us to assess whether they really impact clinical outcomes positively. At a health systems level, there's other pieces as well to think about: infrastructure, platforms, and others, interoperability, and these are all good features as well, which SPESI will share the team regarding how having an ecosystem, I guess, built on a particular technology stack might help with many of these issues of scaling. Feel free to email me afterwards as well, and you can use the QR code here The slides will be shared to access what work we do in school regarding digital health and AI. I'll hand over now to the Stanford SPECI team to share regarding the platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony, and good morning, everyone. I think we're all going to just quickly introduce ourselves. We're going to start with a high-level overview. That was a great overview about the challenges with all the, the plethora of digital health applications out there. And but we're also going to talk, I want to tell a little bit of a story in terms of how we got to where we are and where we live and so on. So my name is Oliver Lamy. I'm a vascular surgeon and the director of biodesign for digital health. And I would like the others to introduce themselves. I don't know, Vishnu, Paul, if you can quickly introduce yourselves.
Yeah. Hey, Paul. I'm a software engineer by training, work together with Oliver and Vishnu also at Biodesign Digital Health.
Hi, I'm Vishnu. I'm an internist and software engineer, and I work together on the Biodesign Digital Health team.
Fantastic. So we don't have that much time, so I'm gonna just quickly get going. So we're from the center called Stanford Biodesign, and you're gonna hear a little bit about it. And really, our mission is to scale access to care. If we had to, choose a tagline, that's what it would be. All right, Paul, if you could go to the next slide. So in the United States, and I think this is common in most places, the cost of healthcare continues to go up exponentially. Now, it may not be as high in Australia as it is in the US, but it's a fairly significant percentage of the GDP, over 20% now, and a significant amount. Despite all the spending, though, our outcomes are pretty poor compared to other countries, given the spend. And then you add to that you have this aging society, which I think is happening globally, the octogenarians. And then you add on top of that you just don't have enough doctors to take care of all these older patients with more and more chronic conditions. And the government, you can go to the next slide, Paul. The government realized this and quickly realized, okay, we need to invest, or anything we invest in needs to meet the triple aim, quadruple aim. And so whatever solution we think of needs to not only improve the patient outcomes, do it at a lower cost and be able to be scalable. And it turns out digital health fits the niche, not for everything, maybe not on the treatment side, maybe more on the prevention side. But next slide, Paul. But what's fascinating about digital, and this is a very, very famous slide from one of our founders of Biodesign, Paul Yock, who would always show this slide saying, you think you get into healthcare and you want to innovate, and there's the customer, or and there's the person creating the product, and it's that simple. But no, healthcare is very different. It's like an eight-headed monster with all these different stakeholders. And when digital started over 10 years ago, when digital started to grow, and we suggested for digital to be kind of a subcategory within biodesign, Paul Yock, or Dr. Yock, had a real challenge he was trying to figure out in his head, like, how does it fit into the biodesign ecosystem as a stakeholder? And if you do the animation, the next click, Paul, what digital is really, in effect, is seeing, is the patient outside of the four walls of the hospital. Because traditionally, for over 20 years, Biodesign had its fellows look in the four walls of the hospital for need areas for innovation, for places to innovation. And what the digital era has done, you saw the slides from Anthony about all the cell phones, connectivity, and so on. It has allowed us to reach the patient in their home outside of the four walls of the hospital. So that's a really important point. Next slide. And so really, even the NIH, which used to be a huge funding organization, we'll see how that holds up. But they even recognize that digital health innovations can democratize access to healthcare by providing the tools and platforms to enable remote diagnosis, treatment, and management of health conditions. So, this whole equity and access is what it was a big initiative. Hopefully it'll maintain a big initiative, and this is where digital really squarely fits in. Next slide. And in the US in particular, this is very US centric. we had these tailwinds to make digital health even more exciting, where, we had the government funding to digitize all the electronic health records, create well-defined standards for interoperability, defined an API and a required API endpoint for all electronic health records to expose, to allow patients to download their health records electronically. And these rules, the HT1 or HTI-1 and HTI-2 rules, continue to push these kind of requirements to digitize and make the data flow more freely in the United States. So these were really important features to make digital health a very exciting and real solution here in the U.S. Reimbursement as well. There was a big push in the U.S. Over 50% of health insurance plans now are part of a alternative payment model, or Medicare Advantage, it's called here, which is more of a value-based care model. So, and with value-based care models versus fee-for-service models, the incentive, there's added incentive to be more preventative, be more predictive, and that's where digital health really has a place, a strong place. And then when it comes to regulatory, our FDA has been really, very proactive in providing guidance and saying, okay, if this is a wellness application, we're not going to regulate it. If it involves cognitive behavioral therapy, coaching, things like that, we're not going to regulate it. So they're very good to demarcate exactly what software as a medical device is, what isn't a medical device, things like that. So you see the importance of regulatory, reimbursement, and digitization, or the data availability, to really enable digital solutions to flourish. And if you click the animation, it just highlights the importance of interoperability, which is one of the factors that Anthony had brought up as well, and the rest of the team will get into. Next slide. So, the problem is, we have all these amazing ideas to increase access, and believe it or not, many are funded, at least at the pilot level. But honestly, from our experience of over 10 years of doing this, it's incredibly hard to go from 0 to 1. And what we noticed is that every team, we would get approached by multiple teams to help them build their applications. And we always felt like a lot of the basics we were just building over and over again. And it felt unnecessary. And especially if you're working in a single ecosystem like our ecosystem at Stanford, it seemed it was very wasteful energy. I'd have to talk to principal investigators and said, well, you need a developer, you need to pick a platform, you need to pick a back end, front end. And it was just, it seemed a very wasteful energy, because it didn't even address the problem or the question they were trying to solve. And if you look at the data, very few projects actually translated successfully. And so that was the kind of the birth of what was called Cardinal Kit, which is now SPESI. And you're going to hear a lot more about it. Next slide. Yeah, so for our, as a group, and this is something I just want to mention because it really helps the ecosystem for us. We're squarely focused on education. Similar, we put up a lot of programs similar to what Anthony is doing. And, we have some courses. We're very focused on translation by developing SPESI, maintaining it, using it in our courses, and also helping projects on campus translate. And we perform a lot of core research, which you'll hear about as well. Next slide. I'm just going to go into the by-design process. Anthony mentioned how important it is to, it's hard to pick out the quality of products, of digital health products. Well, in by-design, one of the core features of our process is that we are a needs-based innovation kind of framework. There's no rocket science to this at all, but really we just spend a lot of time. A third of the innovation process is spent on really identifying a need and kind of reinforcing and making sure that all the stakeholders you saw on that 8-headed monster slide are addressed, and that their needs are addressed. Because if the incentives aren't aligned, your whatever you're building will not fly. Next slide. All right, perfect. So just some, I'm diving a little deeper. The two classes we teach, one is very high level, non-technical, kind of where we provide a lot of vignettes and we let the students kind of do this needs finding process. And then next slide, the more exciting piece, I think for this seminar is the building class, which Paul and Vishnu are huge leaders of, where we actually take on real world projects from the hospital and CS students who really have had very little mobile development experience use SPESI to kind of bring these projects to life. And this is a really exciting class. Next slide. I think it's now Paul's. Paul, I'm going to hand it off to you. Here's a baton. Take it.
Thank you. I'll take it. Yeah, as Oliver said, like getting from like 0 to 1 in these projects is a challenging thing. And as he mentioned before, the group has been tackling this for a very long time. And the current approach that we sort of ended up with, and it has been very successful to sort of scale some of these digital health solutions that we all sort of need to address all these challenges Oliver was mentioning, is called Stanford SPESI. And you can think about it as like a software ecosystem to make building these applications and building especially patient-facing solutions in digital health as easy as possible. For some of you who might be familiar with software engineering and building software, you know that like when we develop software and when we sort of like solve specific problems, we can either do them in a one-off thing and then ship it and then hope that we try to do the next thing better the next time, or we try to build sort of reusable components that help us to avoid making the same mistakes over and over again. And sort of these modules, these components is what we call Lego blocks, exactly what SPESI is made out of. It's these smaller components that address specific needs in digital health applications, from like web dashboards to mobile applications to your web services. And they all are sort of combining all this data in one single data standard and single data format, which is very much used in the US to exchange healthcare data between different healthcare systems or allow patients to have access to the data. And this is called HL7 FHIR. It's an encoding mechanism to ensure that the health data, for example, medications, observations, anything that can be stored in a patient record can be encoded in like a similar way. And SPESI embraces this with each individual modules that sort of try to, when they need to exchange data between each other, sort of use this as a common data standard. And in the end, what we're trying to do for our research, but I mean, the beauty is it's open source, it's accessible for everybody else, is to make sure that when we actually try to tackle these digital health challenges and the research questions that we or some of our collaborators are having, we try to make sure that we have maintainable, scalable, and sort of impactful digital health solutions. So we can focus on the last 20% that are really interesting and that are sort of addressing the research question, while we can sort of leave the infrastructure and the bottom 80% off to that ecosystem and continue to improve it with every single project. As I mentioned before, SPESI itself is open source. It's available on GitHub. You can find it. We have an active community here at Stanford who's helping us to develop it, but we also have contributors around the world, and hopefully after this call, more from Australia, who are really sort of like contributing to this ecosystem and make it possible. So it's not just confined to the sort of walls of Stanford and the ecosystem that we have there, but sort of tries to bring some of that knowledge to everybody else. To give you some good examples of what it's doing, and we always put a nice like mobile application features up on the slides because it's hard to really show you what a server can do in the background. I give you like a few examples that are pretty common to lots of different research studies that we cover. It kind of starts with onboarding and consenting a patient, for example, in a research study. You might know that different ethics review boards or IRB boards have specific constraints of how consent forms have to be formatted, how you obtain electronic signatures, that you can need to have an export for a PDF. All these things have been solved already, and like they're continuously improved. Just recently, somebody made a really large pull request in a repository to make even parsing of some of these consent documents better. It's patient-reported outcomes, questionnaires, things that we need to get from the patients that need to be rendered in the same format on Android, on iOS, in the web. And this is also where the whole interoperability story comes into play. They're all based on the FHIR questionnaire format and sort of output all these different elements in FHIR questionnaire responses, so we can feed in all the different tools that are already familiar with these sort of data standards. It's connecting to different medical devices. As you can imagine, remote patient monitoring studies, we have remote blood pressure cuffs, weight scales, and even custom devices. We're going to have an example later on of like a 2-finger tapping test device that was developed at Stanford and is integrated into this. And as some of you might have worked with wireless connectivity systems or IoT devices, it's not fun to make sure that all the connectivity is working every time and doing all the state handling. Ideally, you want to describe what your device does and then just let the framework handle it for you. And we do all of this, for example, with our medical devices and Bluetooth modules that we have in place. Most of these applications these days, everything is AI. And of course, we're also sort of embracing some of the work where it actually makes sense, which I think is sort of important as we think about needs-based innovation. But of course, you want to, like, for example, embed like a large language model component in there. You want to figure out how to connect to like a cloud large language model, do tool calling, RAG mechanisms, all these things that, I mean, are interesting from a technical challenge perspective, but might not be core to your research question. So we can extract some of that for you. And of course, last but not least, like identity management, having simple ways for users to manage their accounts, change passwords, authenticate with a single sign-on providers is not something that you want to do for every single project. And actually, is more complicated than you think. I mean, like whoever has built like an account management system in the past knows that it's complicated to get all these different paths right. That's, for example, why we have a few account management modules in place to make that work. As I mentioned, like there's also some parts in the backend infrastructure, the web service infrastructure that are really important. SPEZI itself is independent of a specific cloud provider, so all the modules that we have in place are not specifically integrated in Google Cloud, AWS, or Amazon Azure. They're really independent of a cloud provider, but we offer adapters to different cloud solutions. And at Stanford, we use Google Cloud as the one main mechanism of like what we have set up sort of with our IT department. And there, for example, SPEZI is really sort of set up to ensure that we can get data from wearable devices, use Bluetooth connectivity to get it on their phones, then eventually store it sort of in serverless backends like Google Cloud Firebase. And then sort of at Stanford, we have like a really close collaboration with our IT department, which is crucial if you want to deploy these mobile applications at scale, where they really have sort of a TSA pre-check for some of the stuff that we did in SPEZI, which is, I mean, for those who are not from the US, is sort of the quick pass to get past security on an airport in the US, where they know that SPEZI infrastructure is proven. We've validated some of that stuff. We have extensive test coverage for everything that we do, and they're familiar with the cloud service setup, so they can easily spin up new projects and different mobile applications that use this sort of in what they call the Stanford mHealth platforms, which is then also HIPAA compliance of privacy law that we have in the US and some of the other constraints that we have to work with. As I said, everything is open source. All the different modules that we talked about are available on GitHub. We have a larger communities contributing to all these different things. So it's really an invite to like spread it across the world. We did workshops in Germany, in Sweden. We have people from all around the world that write us some emails once they have found these different elements. And we have a whole GitHub discussion forum on there where we invite people to ask questions, work with GitHub issues if you have any sort of challenges that we have. So it's a really invitation to make sure we build a larger global community around this. And of course, like use the different sort of packaging mechanisms to get, for example, for iOS, your different software packages right to you. And in the end, it's like a huge team. And like Vishnu will in a few minutes talk about all the different projects. But if you think about SPEZI, it's like not just the three of us who are sitting here in the room and can share that stuff with you. We have different people who contribute from like even our center side and like helping administer the whole team, to the people who help us with our web components, our Android components, our web service infrastructure, to teaching our classes that share SPEZI. So it's a larger and even growing ecosystem. And maybe at some point, anybody who wants to contribute can also be on the slide in the future. But to give you a bit of an idea of what we're actually working on, like, and what sort of the different research projects that we build on top of SPEZI are and what you can do with the framework, Vishnu has collected a few example projects.
Well, thank you, Paul. So we wanted to show you some of the common use cases for SPEZI, like what you can use the framework for in the real world, whether that's for clinical applications or for research. So a really good example of some of our newer modules, like the SPEZI kind of LLM module, because now generative AI is all the rage and everyone wants to incorporate this technology into their solutions. We created a module called SPEZI LLM, which is very cool because it allows you to run different LLMs on your in your applications, whether they're on device, whether they're in the cloud, or they're somewhere in the middle, which we call the fog. So here's an example here of on the left of an application we built called LLM on FHIR. So as we said before, FHIR is the interoperability standard that is used in the US and many other parts of the world to allow electronic health record systems to communicate with each other. But there's also legislation in the US that requires these electronic medical record systems to have APIs for third-party applications to be able to access that data and for patients to be able to use that data. And so we created a mechanism through this application to be able to let patients chat with their health records. So for example, if they're in the hospital or they've been in the hospital for a few days, they get discharged or they had a surgery or they visited the clinic and they have questions, right? Normally they get some sort of discharge summary or some reports and things are very complicated. There's a lot of jargon, but we created this application which basically allows them to have all of that information explained to them in a summary that's human readable, understandable, adjusted to their literacy level, adjusted to different languages, for example, and they can also ask follow-up questions. And right now we're running a clinical study with a number of patients that are post-surgery to see if they can help them understand their discharge instructions and what happened to them, while they're in the hospital. And if you look at the middle of the slide, it kind of shows this fog computing paradigm that we've been working on. And the idea is that there's a trade-off between efficiency and privacy when it comes to LLMs. So the most powerful LLMs run in the cloud, and so you have to send your data up to a cloud provider like OpenAI or Google or Meta, for example. But a lot of this information is private, health information that you don't necessarily want to be sharing with these cloud providers. So the alternative is to run models on device. However, some devices don't have as much power, and they may not be able to do as much as you can in the cloud. So we have this kind of balance that we play between, do we use the more powerful cloud or do we use the slightly less powerful but more private phone? And with our framework, you can actually dynamically choose between those two. So for some things, you might decide that this can be sent to the cloud because it's not particularly private information. It can be anonymized. For other things, you might want to run it on the phone. And there's a layer in the middle, right? So in your network, you may have other devices, PCs, other kinds of servers, if it's a hospital, for example, and you can run models on those devices and then provide that power to the phones to be able to use them in the applications as well. And that's the fog layer. So we did kind of put this functionality into our LLM module to allow you to have different options for how you're going to balance between privacy and efficiency. I'm going to go to the next slide there. So this is what I kind of talked about. This is the LLM on FHIR project. It is an open source project. So if you go to our GitHub, which Paul showed earlier, you can actually grab this project, and there's even a link to let you try it out on test flight. And you can try it out with your own data. This is another really cool application. I think this is particularly interesting because it solves a really cool problem. So with Parkinson's disease, I think many people may be familiar, but it's essentially a neurological disorder where people have difficulty with controlling their motor movements of their extremities, for example. So they may have tremors, they have issues with their gait, they have slowness, various issues like that. And it's controlled by very complicated regimens of medications that need to be very finely and precisely adjusted to balance between side effects and therapeutic effect. So it's actually really hard to titrate these medications to a point where the person gets the most relief from their condition and doesn't have those unwanted side effects or toxicity. And right now, the only real way to quantify the degree of somebody's symptoms is to have them come into the clinic and be observed and fill out kind of like a scale that's like an analog scale. There's no really good mechanism to quantitatively measure their degree of tremor, for example. So a professor of neurology at Stanford, Dr. Helen Bronte Stewart, has spent almost 20 years attacking this problem, and she devised a mechanism whereby a patient can use a two-finger tapping device at home that looks like a little keyboard. It's like in the center of the screen there. And with the Stanford SPESI ecosystem, we were able to pair that device via Bluetooth with a mobile application that receives the data, processes it with a machine learning algorithm, and then generates metrics that the doctor can use remotely to be able to titrate the medication without the person having to come into the clinic. And it's one of the first ways to be able to validated mechanisms to get both the upper and lower extremity tremor using the same device. So that's really cool. And it kind of shows the whole end-to-end system that we were able to build here. So you have patients using this device at home with a companion mobile application. And on the clinician side, they have a dashboard that's built into their electronic health record system, in this case, Epic, and they're able to see the results in real time. And then they're able to communicate with the patient via telemedicine and adjust the medications without having them come into the clinic, which is super cool.
Yeah, definitely.
You want to talk about engaging, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I can quickly talk about it. Like, I mean, sort of similar to Parkinson's, there are lots of like larger chronic diseases out there, and heart failure is one of the most prominent that we have in the US. And one of the things which is very interesting is that there are certain guideline-derived like medication therapy like regimens that all heart failure patients should be on. And what the Engage HF application is doing is sort of helping patients and providers to find that ideal medication regimen, to give them all the different constraints you might have, such as, for example, lab values that are derived from the electronic health record system. And the cool application is like a SPECI-based mobile application. It connects to Bluetooth, blood pressure cuffs, weight scales, get patient-reported outcomes using questionnaires, and sort of has a cloud algorithm that processes all this data together with data that we get from the providers that are entered, like lab values and some other information that's entered in a web dashboard, and provides you a personalized medication recommendation for you, and even allows like a provider to download a small PDF report so they can take this into the next sort of clinic visit or like the next patient visit and sort of discuss the current medications that the patient is on together with them. It's a multi-center trial, so it's not only used at Stanford, it's like a SPECI-based application that has been deployed at Johns Hopkins, University of Washington, and University of Michigan. And it's really like a multi-center trial. We've enrolled several patients, and we're even expanding some of that infrastructure based on SPECI, where we even want to expand this not only to be used as a mobile application, but as a mechanism so a patient can even like call like a phone number and then have a voice-based AI conversation with the same system input, with the same mechanisms. So some for patients, and especially for heart patients, for other patients, that's really important, who might not even be able to interact with a phone, who might be too old, or like might be able to like use all these new technologies, to still be able to participate in these different mechanisms where all these cloud integrations and EHR integrations become really essential. Yeah. Anything to add there?
No, it's perfect.
Yeah. Pause.
Yeah, and this is another example of how this framework can be used not only for adult medical conditions, but also in children. So actually, pediatric digital health is an area that's kind of underserved in a lot of ways. And so we've taken some of these projects that have been brought to us by pediatricians at Stanford. So this is an example of one where they were curious to see if the Apple Watch could be as good as a gold standard device, like a loop recorder or a Zio patch, for being able to identify abnormal heart rhythms in children. So this is a study that we put together where the patients wear the patch, which is like the gold standard, and then they also have an Apple Watch, and then the mobile application reads the ECG, raw ECG data from the watch, and it can identify abnormal rhythms, and also the patient can put in any symptoms they're having and things like that, and that way we can kind of evaluate whether the Apple Watch can be used as a way to detect arrhythmias or irregular heart rhythms in children. And there's some early data that came out. This is from a retrospective analysis that we did and published last year that showed that actually there were many arrhythmias that were picked up from the Apple Watch that may not have been identified, even the standard recording procedures.
Yes. Yeah.
Since people are wearing the watch like continuously.
Yeah.
This one maybe you want to talk about?
Oh yeah, I mean, like, and it even expands beyond sort of some of the measurable health outcomes we look into like, I think the space which is really fascinating, where we go beyond digital biomarkers, so elements that we can derive from these like patient-reported outcomes, devices, some of the other information we get to patients, to what we call digital interventions. This idea that some of the conditions that patients are having, or some of the challenges that patients are having, could actually be addressed by a smartphone or like by a mobile application. And one of the most prominent examples is actually social media and smartphone addiction. I mean, this is basically the source of the evil anyways. So there might be a good mechanism how we can address some of these different things. And we're partnering together with like an application which is called OneSick, which is doing exactly that. It's like an application that allows a patient or like somebody who is feeling that they use their smartphone too much or like are having problems with using social media applications to install this application as sort of a small digital intervention that stops you from opening this application, asks you to like take, for example, a deep breath or sort of some of the other interventions. And this is especially challenging, of course, in adolescents, which are sort of like new to the social media game or sort of dependent on some of these applications. And that's what we're doing together with the Center for Digital Health here at Stanford, which is a close collaborator on this and has funded some of that research. We're together with like a larger group, we're looking into like the actual measurable health outcomes for these digital interventions. So we want to assess like, do these digital interventions actually have measurable health outcome on activity, sleep data, and some of the things that we can already collect on these smartphones by after patients have installed this application, and do we see different sort of mechanisms that we can observe that certain types of interventions, for example, have a larger effect. So it's a really cool mechanism where we sort of close a loop of like we get patient-reported data, we get like all the measurable health metrics that we get on their phone, and we utilize to even validate that digital interventions, sort of things that we can provide on the same smartphone, can sort of then support patients' health journeys, in this case, sort of help with social media addiction and problematic smartphone usage. Yeah, really cool project where SPESI is also helping to get all this data off those devices and do that study infrastructure. Oh yeah, and this is this is a video recording of like how the OneSick app works. So basically, when you launch Instagram, it just shows you like you spent try to open the application 3 times already, and sort of gives you a small digital intervention. And in the study, basically patients then or like participants then donate us their usage data as well as sort of the health kit metrics that we get from there. Yeah.
Yeah, so those are just some of the examples of different use cases for SPESI. These are all real applications that we built for clinical and research purposes, and they're all out there in the wild. And the beautiful thing is that most of them are actually open source, and you can go to our GitHub. This is our Stanford Biodesign Digital Health GitHub, and there you'll be able to find many of these projects, including the Engage HF project that we just showed, the OneSec project, and the Pause project as well. And then you can use those as kind of like a starting point to build your own similar application. And I don't know if you mentioned it before, but there's also, if you go over to the SPESI GitHub, which Paul showed before, there is a template application that you can go ahead and download, and it's a fully functional digital health mobile app that provides all those different functionalities like the account, the e-consent, the pulling the data off of the wearable devices, and puts it together in a template that you can just spin up and then start customizing for your own use case. So that's a really convenient way to get in, play around with the framework, see how you like it, and then start working on your own project.
Could you
and
talk
it's all
a little
open
bit,
source, MIT licensed.
I would add, Vishnu, can you add a little bit about what does it take to build one right now? Is it a no code one? Do you need Xcode? What is Xcode? Is it available on Android? Because I'm assuming in Australia, I don't know, what is the split between Android and iOS in Australia? I don't know. But in the rest of the world, outside of the US, yeah. Do you want to talk about that a little?
I can get it started, and then I'll turn it over to Paul, who's kind of leading the efforts to do this development, and he can give you a lot more detail. But essentially, what we've tried to do is we tried to, when you build a mobile app, there's a lot of stuff you have to worry about, like everything from the login screen to like, where am I going to store my data? What format is it going to be in? If I have to store a lab value, how do I store that? What are the units? What is the schema? We try to take on, and of course, if you want to connect to devices, like how do I figure out a Bluetooth protocol? How do I read in data from HealthKit? How do I create a basic questionnaire? We took all those basic things and we turned them into modules. And the idea is that you can take those modules and then you can put them together and just customize them instead of having to build everything from scratch. And the beauty of that approach is, one, it saves you a lot of time because we've already made all the mistakes and we figured out how to do it better. And the other thing is that these modules are updatable, right? So every project out there of the dozens and dozens that use our modules, they can all get updates. So basically the idea is that our team is constantly adding new functionality, new features, fixing bugs, but so is everybody else out there in the community. And when someone improves their one of the modules and provides that code back to the community, all the other projects can benefit from that. So that's one huge benefit. The other thing is the mechanism for building a module is also open source. So you can build your own custom modules for your own institution, and you can use them and distribute them amongst your own researchers or your own labs and build applications that are customized for your institution. So this makes a really nice, standardized, structured way to build these applications. And like Paul said, working with your IT department, you can create some sort of platform where people can quickly put these apps together, deploy them onto that platform, and they'll all be built in kind of the same way, using the same standards under the hood, using the same tried and tested, battle-tested code, which makes things a lot more easy. It makes people a lot more comfortable. It makes it a lot easier to get through regulatory requirements and hoops and things like that. So I think that's kind of the philosophy behind it. It is not a no-code system in that you wouldn't be able to go to a website yet. This is something we're working on, because LLMs can do a lot of coding. They're not that good at mobile development right now, to be perfectly honest. They're a lot better at web development, but we are working on that. Eventually, you might be able to go to an LLM and say, hey, build me a SPESI app that can do ABC, and it'll be able to assemble those modules for you. That's the goal. And if anybody out there wants to help us with that, we're all open for your help, if you want to get involved. But right now, yes, you would have to, set up a development environment, which if you're building an iOS app, that means downloading the Xcode software. If you're building an Android app, the Android Studio, and then be able to know enough of the language to assemble these modules together. But it saves you a lot of time. The other thing is that we try to build similar modules on iOS and Android. So when you've built your iOS application and you go over to Android, you're not really starting with a completely blank slate as you would be otherwise. You can go over to your Android application and say, okay, well, I need to use the same modules. Let me look for the Android equivalent of the SPESI account module, the Android equivalent of the SPESI, consent module, and then assemble those things together more or less in the same way. Of course, there are differences between platforms. There are idiosyncrasies between each platform. But the idea is once you get used to how SPESI works, you should be able to translate it between platforms a lot more easily than if you were starting from scratch. And Paul is the one who's kind of the mastermind behind all of this. He's our computer science PhD, and he designed all of the underlying structure that makes all this possible. So I want to turn it over to you to kind of talk a little bit more about the benefits here in using SPESI.
Maybe Paul,
I think, yeah.
I have one comment I think you should discuss. I know I'm starting a QA here. I'm asking the questions, but why not use React? Why not use a cross-platform? Why should I maintain and build two code bases?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and I think Vishnu already covered a lot of the sort of development workflow. To cover the question about why not just use one single sort of cross-platform solution, I think first of all there are very good use cases for this cross-platform solutions out there. So if you want to build a simple application that displays content to users that just is sort of informative but doesn't need to fully embed, for example, in system features like Bluetooth connectivity, like scheduling elements in the background, like getting HealthKit data, encoding all of this, doing passive data collection, then these are very good application technologies. But the challenge that we're facing and the research that we're doing is most of the time really on the cutting edge part of research. We're trying to figure out how to execute large language model on device. That's something that uses bare metal technology that's on the device that needs to have C, C++ APIs that are then sort of bridged in some of the stuff that we do. And it's going to be really challenging if you add more and more abstraction layers where you're separating yourself more and more from these core operating system technologies. And that's why we made the decision at the beginning that sort of the different SPESI modules are pretty similar across Android and iOS, but they sort of really use the platform technologies that are under the hood and sort of to take most advantage of, for example, Apple HealthKit to get HealthKit information. We use some Apple technologies like their research kit and their CareKit frameworks to help us to abstract some of these things for us. We use Bluetooth connectivity, core Bluetooth, MLX, some of the machine learning execution stuff that's on there. And those really are only easily accessible, at least manageable in sort of using these specific platform technologies, which sometimes means, yes, you have to build stuff twice, but you also build it very much sort of in the design system and in the best sort of integration points in these operating systems. And we made, I think, in my life, I've built lots of different software systems. I made different design trade-offs in the past. And I think sort of for the stuff that SPESI is focused on, which is these digital health AI integrated solutions, I think this is sort of the best way that we came up with. And so far, we didn't hit a wall and worked pretty well for us. Yeah.
Perfect. Why don't we have 2 more slides and then we can start the Q&A. Do you want to?
Yeah.
So I think,
Go ahead, Oliver.
I think really we're Anthony, we just want to express our gratitude for you asking us to join and present our work. We are incredibly collaborative. We're very interested in, working together, sharing this. And like Vishnu said, and Paul mentioned that, if you want to take this, make it your own, whatever. I mean, we think there's incredible opportunity here. We just want to squeeze the most juice out of the potential of any sort of digital health solutions to help humanity and mankind. And so for that reason, you can click the next slide. Our animation, the last animation, we really want, to collaborate, make sure to, if you want to build applications together, if you want to do research together, or even hands-on, educational programs such as this, we're very interested. We actually sponsor visiting research scholars as well at Stanford. If there's alignment, we can talk about that. So I'll just end it with that. Thank you for allowing us to come. And I know there are a few questions coming. Anthony, I'll let you lead the Q&A session.
Thanks, Oliver, Paul, Vishnu. Maybe you might want to stop sharing and we can just enter to the Q&A. But again, I think I started knowing this actually from the time it was Cardinal Kit. I think very early days, very different. I think that was still Vishnu, you, and I don't know, I think a few others. I think that was even before Paul joined the team. And it was great to see the ecosystem grow. And I think I think one bit maybe to those from UNSW in this call, I think post this, if people want to reach out, happy for us actually to chat and see how maybe as a group at UNSW we can work to develop a collaborative that can work with the group there as well to expand it further and maybe build some infrastructure as well to help, as you mentioned, right? Make it easier for people to build apps, which is as a hub what we want to do at the school, population health, and really have people focus on the problem and the solution, not on really the text. Lots of questions coming in, so I'll just get into that at the start. There's a question from Helen. Can you give us an idea of the number of users on the apps that's been built with SPECI? Is it how scalable it is? Probably is one question right there. Probably asking, can it host thousands, 10,000 users? What's it been like?
Yeah. I mean, I can get you started. So I think this infrastructure has been battle tested with thousands of users. I don't think we have an application that has 10,000 of users at this point, but sort of we've been running multiple trials. We've been enrolling several patients across different institutions. And the good thing is, for example, for our Stanford-hosted trials, the mobile sites are rarely the resource constraints about scaling things. It's more like cloud service infrastructure that's behind it. And that's by basically by building on Google Cloud with some of the sort of Stanford IT infrastructure we have, I think there's sort of an close to infinite scaling mechanism in there, at least definitely well enough for large scale patient cohorts that we've been using. And sort of like, I think the less important part is like how many sort of like users have been using it. I think the more important part is that we have like been testing this for multiple years across multiple different constraints and different environments, and we learned so much about this. Like even like from the first users who used some of the Cardinal Kit work and then SPECI, sort of we learned from lots of the mistakes our modules have evolved, and especially the ones that have sort of version 1, version 2, version tags in there have been really tested in multiple different actual study deployments, which sort of gives us the confidence that we continue to use them ourselves, but I think also should give others the confidence that they can build on top of
I would
it.
also, just to address Helen's point about the range of users. I mean, we have startups. I mean, there's a company called Laminar that developed a wearable Doppler ultrasound. It's pretty cool. They were developers of technology for mobile devices, so they know how to work with low energy ultrasound or develop low energy ultrasound. So they're using it, as a startup. We have research, obviously researchers primarily, but we have the wide range, the QDG, the project, the Parkinson's, finger tapping one started as research, but is spinning out as a company. So, I mean, in terms of the range of users.
It's an FDA breakthrough device.
Yeah.
Which one? Oh, and FDA.
Oh, it was designated as an FDA breakthrough device, which basically the FDA selects devices that they think have the potential to make a dramatic impact on the lives of people, and that we're fortunate to have that designation.
Laminar is actually FDA approved as well. Laminar is FDA approved as well. I didn't even think about that, but so that's the
Correct, yeah.
range of users.
And we have pharmaceutical companies that have used it. Regeneron, we built an app
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different use cases for it, from research to clinical. And honestly, because it's an open source framework, a lot of times we don't even know who's using it. I mean, we have people reach out from all over the place, like from different countries, to say like, hey, we've been using this for the last 3 years in our hospital, and it's been great. So that's kind of the beauty of an open source community.
And that's the great thing, right? Really, from smaller scale projects to even larger companies can benefit from it, and also give back, we would hope, right, to the ecosystem. So Robin's got a question, which I think is sort of answered in your slide, but you might want to expand a bit more regarding AI being incorporated in the applications. I've seen earlier, I think you give examples of LLM or generative AI. Are there other examples that you want to share on that front?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, I would say I'm excited about this. I'm sorry, but this is I'm a vascular surgeon, and one of the cool things, at least on the, running models on device, we've had 2 examples, or 3, I think, examples where one is where, have you heard of the Doppler? Doppler ultrasound,
Yep.
the pencil Doppler to check for blood flow. We did this cool project where we trained a model that deployed it on device using SPEZY, where it would listen to the audio. So you'd have a typical pencil Doppler. It would listen to the audio, and then using the on-device, I think it was Core ML on an iPhone, it would then convert that to an estimated ankle brachial index, which is pretty cool. So that's one that's, using AI on device. We had some image processing ones. We had an acne one. We had one project in class where people would take a screenshot of their face, and because it's very private and personal, that you didn't want to analyze, give like the inflammation score for acne or whatever, they didn't want that to go to the cloud. So that was done on device, that model. Any ones I'm forgetting? I mean, obviously the LLM ones, with language models are really popular.
Lots of language model integration. One thing I want to highlight is that we're currently working with the ETH in Zurich, which is like a large European research institution, where they have developed something called Clyde, which is sort of meant to easily deploy sort of Python-based models on device. And we're actually working together, and like one of their PhD students is a visiting researcher in our lab and has done a fantastic job in the last few months to align some of these ecosystems even more, so we can expand some of the on-device deployment for these machine learning models, and sort of make sure that Clyde-based applications and SPEZY-based applications sort of use the same technical foundations. So there's going to be some really cool movement even there in the future, where we're trying to sort of use some of the bridge building that we've done in the past to like ensure that we also, I mean, this is sort of the open invitation to everybody else. It doesn't mean that we have to maintain all the software and it has to be hosted at us. Like, it's going to be closer integrated sort of with a SPEZY ecosystem. So every Clyde module that they have is basically just the SPEZY module under the hood. So anybody who already has a SPEZY application can integrate this. And I think this is going to be the key moving forward with lots of these on-device federated learning ecosystems that we're working with. Yeah.
Right. There's a question as well. I'll jump a bit because of time as well. From Sultana, what advice would you give someone that's early in their careers to use the platform but not really have coding LLM experience? Probably a question you hear often. Any suggestions?
I mean, I would say, because I'm a non-coder, so I think I'm most. I mean, I've played with it. I've played with Xcode, but brutally not a coder. I'll be brutally honest. But I think you always bring something to the table. So whether you're the clinician or have some insight or passion, I think there are, in our class, honestly, I would say, I don't know, was it 99% or 98% had no iOS experience, had never even touched Xcode. So it's actually, what I've learned about coding, it's you got to put in the long hours, burn the midnight oil, which is an Australian thing, I think. Right? It's all about debugging. So you just have to dive in and put in the time. And that's what it takes, commitment, if you want to build it yourself. I mean, honestly, it's very doable now with all these, all the support you have with, the AIs, as Vishnu said, aren't fantastic. We actually Vishnu tried to build a custom GPT to help our class, because we know the students are going to use AIs. So we were like, let's at least give them one that works better. But even that wasn't, But that wasn't even good enough, right, Vishnu? I mean, that wasn't.
They're getting
satisfying.
better. Honestly, they're getting better, and I can see in a couple years' time they'll be good enough to really do a decent amount of the dev.
Yeah, and I mean, one
But I
thing I
think-
want to add maybe to Oliver's comments is that I think what's also important is that it's never like a single like person's job to build like a research study. And I mean, like you can see this in our team. We have engineers who are software engineers and they're really passionate about healthcare, but they have little to no healthcare experience or background. And then we have clinicians who might have less of a coding experience. So I think even if you feel that you might not be the expert in coding, of course you can learn it. I think everybody, like I'm pretty sure that if you're in this call, you're smart enough to learn it pretty fast. But I think in the end also find somebody who is really passionate about this, maybe from the computer science perspective, from the software engineering perspective, and team up. They might have a really easy time to do some of the modifications, and you might have an easy time doing the study design. So like use that also as like a good way to just engage with some folks in the CS departments, other departments. Yeah.
Build a team. That's the answer. Build a team. Yeah.
Okay. The other questions are, one is, well, someone was interested in the 8-headed stakeholder that you mentioned earlier, and who they are. But in some ways as well, probably I'll add to that being, how does the platform or ecosystem help with tackling some of those cases, I guess, as well. Maybe a bit on regulation and the sort as well, right? That you've touched upon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have obviously you have the patients, the provider, you have the insurance companies, so the payer, the regulatory bodies, that are the established, FDAs and so on. And then you have the politicians, you have so policy, right, is a big one. There's, the media plays a big role in terms of, building or having people gain trust, in systems, like should you trust the corporations, things like that. You have especially in digital health, you have we work with a lot of vendors, we have the Googles, the Microsofts that are vendors that we work with. So, there are a lot of stakeholders. Some are more invested than others, but the big ones, depending on your project, you really, really, really need to outline the patient journey that you're addressing and really figure out who all the stakeholders are in that specific patient journey. And unless you're really thinking about and kind of addressing all the stakeholders, if you're not satisfying one of them, it could really kill a project. It can really, cause a lot of friction. So that's why it's just important to be, just to be aware. That's the point of that slide, is to be aware. And in the biodesign process, you are supposed to interview and do a lot of research, interviewing all those stakeholders to make sure that you're not missing any insights or concerns from each one of them.
Good. I think that's all the time we have for today. Thanks again to Oliver, Paul, and Vishnu for sharing. I think lots of food for thought. Hopefully more work that we can do from Australia as well with you all in the future. And thanks again, essentially, for coming. I know it's late as well for you. So
yeah, feel free to reach out. We have a Spezi at stanford.edu, or you can find our emails online.
Isn't Spezi team at Stanford?
Or Spezi team. Yeah. Or just look online. It's all online.
Edit the chat. Oh.
Yeah. Definitely.
Lots of thanks as well in the chat.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
for hosting us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anthony. This was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony.
Really enjoyed it.
All right.
Thank
Look
you.
forward to
Bye.
continuing the discussion. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
You too.